2012. She was invited to a party on the weekend that she was celebrating her upcoming birthday. And depending on which witness statement you want to believe, 15 minutes or 45 minutes after she arrived, she was dead, shot by an off-duty Detroit police officer with his service weapon. With 40 witnesses, one call to 911, 25 minutes between the shot and the call. I've been fighting for the last 7 years for my daughter's justice. Adacia should be turning 32 this year, but she'll forever be 24 years, 364 days.
I was just like you. I see things differently. I was just like you, but I was just like you. I would believe everything I've heard and seen. I was innocent. I aimlessly followed the script and narration from the media. I'm hurt just like you. I was conditioned to trust and was guilty. The programming of media to think that everything is normal and everyone is equal. We're all equal, and we're under the same judgment of the law. That all changed. Everything changed when Jamar Clark was killed. Everything changed.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, there you go. Good.
the cops that shot my son, they know what they did. They should have used a taser or something. My son he was quiet. I felt bad because he came out the room quietly, went in the hallway. EMS said, you gotta go. He said, no, I don't wanna go. And he raised his voice, you gotta go now. My son said no, because my son made a statement. EMS didn't like what he said. So he said, you're gonna go now. And from the deep of his voice, yelled. And then next thing you know, he burst the door open. The same two rookies that shot my son. These are the two that shot my son. They pushed the door open, not me next to my son, on the floor in the hallway, and shot him. Each one of them put a bullet in the abdomen and in the groin. And I'm yelling, getting up, what part of the body did you shoot my son?
So anytime a person gets to using like the word trauma, you know, you're talking about sense of powerlessness, inability to protect, serious threat to serious injury or death. If you just zoom out of that context and you just think about from an individual standpoint, who is responsible for protecting people? And if you're talking about children, or if you're talking about adults, it's the first line of protection for anybody is their family system and then their community. But when you start talking about, like, if you put a specifier on there like black, once you say black, now you got to look at black communities and black families, and then you have to look at their levels of functioning, because those are our support systems. Whatever type of mental health issues that we're exhibiting or that we're experiencing is going to be 100% connected to our family and our community supports, or the lack thereof. And we already know historically, and that's why, like, for me, when I talk about trauma, I might talk about trauma specifically, like, to certain, I'll use that word specific to certain communities. When I talk about black people, I might more frequently use the word like ma'afa. And the reason why I'm going to use that is because, again, it has a cultural, political context for the black experience, which means, like, it's this ongoing, persistent since, you know, the first kidnapping of Africans and bringing them here to colonize and dehumanize, that process is ongoing. And so part of that dehumanization is about destroying the black family system and the black community system. So, like, you know, most people, if you go to any city where there's been a black community or where there's currently a black community, they'll have a similar story.
The critique is that the institution as a whole is intended to reinforce the racial order of American capitalism. And it is intended to keep people in particular social and physical locations with or without access to the things they need, and to discipline us into obedience and poverty, and to continuing to allow ourselves to be exploited and even murdered in the street. And so from my perspective, and from the perspective of the groups with which I work, who are police abolitionists, the police are not an institution which can be reformed. Their original purpose, which is extenuating into today, which extends into today, and which you can see exemplified in the amazing amounts of murder, abuse, and violence perpetrated by the police forces, and the disproportionate ways in which they target black folks, native folks, other folks of color, and poor working folks, as well as people in mental crisis or emotional crisis. The ways in which their violence rebounds upon us is an example of how their original purpose continues to be fulfilled today.
In an institution and get away with murder. That's completely unacceptable. There has been throughout American history an unusual and absurd fear of black men that fuels the overreaction of officers when they come into contact with black men. And I would say that the hatred has fueled laws that have been put in place that continue to oppress black men, women, and children. It has resulted in the enslavement of people of African descent. It resulted in Jim Crow laws, and now it has resulted in mass incarceration and the system of policing that is used to fuel that particular institution.
Well, when he climbed out of the car, on the video, it showed where my son had both of his hands up, and he never faced the officer. The officer was at an angle to him. He was looking at the people in the community, and he was pointing down at the officer, cell phone in one hand, this hand pointing at the officer while he engaged with the people, stating that, do y'all see this? Do y'all see what he's trying to do to me? And as my son tilted this way, he shot him in the heart, and he dropped.
It's difficult doing this project. It's difficult doing this project, but I am learning. I am learning more about myself, how to feel more comfortable around other people with the same trauma, stress. Feeling like you're in a fishbowl, in a prison. It's difficult. It's tiresome.
I'm trying to assure you in everything, and it wasn't enough to override all of the conditioning that had been put in that police officer's body, right? And black people don't have a way of articulating what that is. We go to racism, we go to this, we go to that, but there is a long history of that stuff getting pushed down. So now we see all of it on film, right? And we watch this brother get murdered. And then we say, and then the person gets off, and it feels bigger to us than just than watching it on film, right? There's a quality to it, and that's the historical quality, right? So there's the historical, there's the intergenerational, there's the persistent institutional, and then there's the personal traumas that we deal with ourselves, and all of those things get coupled together, right? And so what you watch is we watch that on TV, and we have this rage that comes up, and we have this sadness that comes up, and then we don't know how to articulate it, so then that looks like anxiety over time, and then that looks like depression over time. Okay. Do you see what I mean? Okay. Because it is a weight. When we experience that, the historical aspects of it, we're not just experiencing what we're watching on TV. We're experiencing the vibratory aspects of it, the image and thought aspects of it, the meaning-making aspects of it, the behavioral aspects of it, the affect and feelings aspect of it, and the sensational quality to it.
Justice has been forgotten for people of color. And, we still fighting every day in so many areas. And it's not just justice in the courtroom and justice with police. It's in education. It's in medical areas, because when Black people are killed, it affects your health. It's stressful. It's high blood. It causes high blood pressure. And then, guess what? You can't go to school. You can't go to work. You're not even motivated to do anything because now you're scared to even leave the house. And when the police are being called on people for living, black people are just living, and the police are being called on them. It's traumatic. So yeah, justice has been forgotten. And I don't know when we're going to get it back.
They kill them. It's not us, and I want to make that clear. As mothers, and if a mother's speaking, well, white people, they need to stop. It's the judicial system that sets it up to be a racial issue. Because this is bigger than Cordell and I. And when I think about Yolanda McNair, daughter Adacia, that's my son. Cordell is Adacia. Cordell is Jonathan Victor. Cordell is Joseph Bagar. Cordell is Jaffrey Smith. Cordell is Hardell Sherrill. That's who Cordell is. I am Yolanda McNair. I am Donna Chisace. I am Tony Bogard. I am Matilda Smith. I am Delshia Perry. I am Abby Blevins. That's who I am as a mother. And see, it's easy to put a color on it. And it is easy, and let me talk about the media. It's easy for the media to say, oh, you have Cordell Handy over here, and then you have these, you have Valerie Castile over here, which you know. What do they call her son's death? What do they call it? They don't call it like they would my son or the rest of these mothers. And the reason why I'm saying this, what is it called? They call it high profile. And I love Valerie. Let me be clear to say that the first mother I met when my son was gunned down, she reached out and found me. But the reason why, and Val is not big on it either, high profile. Because you know what, the media does that. The media does that, put that name out there to say, hey, look at Philando Castile. Look at Tamir Rice. Oh, don't worry about Jaffrey Smith. Don't worry about Jonathan Victor. Don't worry about Adacia Miller. Don't worry about Cordell Handy. You got all these millions of killings by police. But we just want you all to look at the 10 over here. Let me say this. Society has to work smart and not hard. Look at the whole picture. The picture's big.
It's just, again, just that whiteness, that the way that white people are is normal, right, and good, and that our heroes in this country are these sort of shiny people instead of really complex folks who were complacent and complicit in horrific injustices. Again, when we start to look at that and when we start to complicate those really singular, simple-minded narratives, then I have committed myself and tried to encourage other folks to go on a lifelong journey of seeking knowledge and wisdom and listening to the thought leaders and everyday people of color who've gone before us, so that then I can have a deeper understanding and a heart, body, soul connection to saying I have to show up differently in the world. So in that journey of listening and learning, I think, to answer your question, I think about Ella Baker's assertion that until the killing of Black men, the sons of Black mothers, becomes as important to this nation as the killing of white mothers' sons, we who believe in freedom cannot rest.
The fire station. The officer gets out of his patrol car with his gun already drawn. And he comes up to the car where Gary's sitting on the window ledge and puts that gun to Gary's head and grabs him by the collar of his shirt. When he pulls Gary off of the car, Gary is stumbling back to get his balance. And another officer came and made one fatal gunshot wound to Gary's chest, killing him.
in order for a police officer to be justified in a killing, they still have a process that they have to go through. So a police officer will kill somebody, you know, they'll kill like a Jamar Clark. And then that officer has to go through a process, which is typically going to deal with some type of judiciary process. And then they're going to deal with the legalities of were they in the realm of what was legal in their job. And what you see is that all of these police officers are always adjudicated. They're adjudicated as being innocent from these things, which means the legislative and the judicial branch of government are complicit in these killings as well. And even more so, it means that these killings are sanctioned killings. Otherwise, there'd be a different outcome. If our legislative and judiciary branches of government felt the way that the community felt, they would the police officers would have a different response and a different consequence. But there's a disconnect. The community feels one way and interprets that experience one way, and then the branches of government side with the people who they hired to make those specific killings.
I believe that we will win. 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 I believe that we will win.
So when we started digging more deeply into the shooting death of Jamar Clark, one of the facts that came out that was the most egregious was the fact that Jamar Clark was shot and killed by Minneapolis police officers within 61 seconds of them encountering him. Now think about that, 61 seconds. That meant that the officers did not take any time to get to know Jamar Clark, to de-escalate the situation, to ask any questions. They immediately grabbed him from behind in a violent manner upon approaching him, slammed him to the ground, and within a minute, this man was dead. Had police officers followed proper protocol, had they worked to de-escalate the situation, had they seen Jamar Clark as a human being, it's very likely that he would still be alive today. The system failed Jamar Clark.
I know that we will win. 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 I know that we will win.
I remember hearing about when Jamar Clark was first killed, and it was after Philando Castile was killed. And I don't think that I healed from that incident. When Jamar Clark was killed and just seeing everything going on at the police station, it hurt me all over again, because as the mother of a young black man, every time he goes out of the house, I'm afraid he could be a Jamar Clark or a Philando Castile. And even as an attorney, working in the system and seeing every day what happens to young black men and how they are treated by police officers, I start every day praying for my own son. So when we see these things happen to young black men, I can tell you it tears at a piece of every black woman in this community.
Well, sir. Good. How are you? Good. Reason I pulled you over, your brake lights are out. So you only have one active brake light, and that's going to be your passenger side one, your third brake light, which is up here on top, and on this one back here. is going to be out. You have your license and insurance? Don't reach for it, son. Don't pull it out. Don't pull it out.
I will. He just shot his arm off. We got pulled over on Larpener.
Told him not to reach for it. I told him to get his hand out.
You told him to get his ID, sir, his driver's license. Oh my God, please don't tell me he's dead.
We think, and I know I personally think, that he did everything that was right. He had the ability to carry. He had a permit to carry. He was stopped by the police and he said to the police officer, "I have a gun on me." He was in his car with his seatbelt on, and yet I and so many feel that he did everything that was right and was still killed. It's wrong. We feel this injustice, and it's not an injustice of today. It's an injustice of the history of America. And so one of the things I've been talking a lot about is the impact that those shootings of someone's father, of someone's brother, of someone's uncle, of someone's husband has an impact on our community. You know, I've been talking a lot about what that impacts look like in the form of trauma. Because as Black people, we are expected to have someone killed and the very next day to be able to go to work, the very next day for our kids to go to school, the very next day for us to just keep going on like we are not impacted by that loss of that individual.
They were given to him, and he succumbed to his injuries on August 6, 2014. Nothing was done to this police officer. He's still working. He was on desk duty for a couple weeks after the incident happened. But to make a long story short, my son should be here. He shouldn't be dead. And this police officer he should have been held accountable because he was wrong, because he lied. And I say all the time, how could you leave a child? My son wasn't a grown man, he was a child. How could you leave a child in the street like that? And I'd say like an animal, but then I thought, animals are treated better than that. That was a human being. Whether he was on duty or off duty, he should have helped my son. And even if you were wrong, face the consequences. You did wrong, help him. He didn't do anything to help my son.
What are some of the adverse signs of being having this trauma inside of our body unchecked?
Yeah. Well, it can look like Black people can't never do nothing right. Ends ain't S-H-I-T. It can look like being harsher for the same infraction, being harsher on Black bodies than white bodies. It can look like the N-word. It can look like traumatic retentions. Like I think that whoopings, right? Not discipline. Whoopings. That did not happen out of context to us being whipped, right? And so I think it can look like a myriad of behaviors and vibes and senses and what we find beautiful, what we lean into and what we recoil from. For me, the decontextualized, internalized white body supremacy gets infused in everything. That's why we have to have reprieve spaces so we can stop. That's why we have to have practices and somatic witnesses and things like where I can track you and I can watch you and I can help you stop and help you go, oh, did you notice that? I'm noticing when you talk about that, this thing.
If you live in a neighborhood where folks are getting killed by the police, how much hope do you have? It's like It affects, it sucks the life right out of you. And a piece of you is being killed every time one of those, when Jamar Clark was killed, a piece of me died. A piece of you died. And you don't even realize it until now. You don't have motivation to get out of your bed. You don't have motivation to go out with your friends. You don't have motivation to sign up for a class you've been wanting to do. A piece of you died and it's not coming back. But what do you do with what's left? We have to do something. Every time a black man is killed, something dies in every last one of us. It does. Just something in me died.
This disgusts me. This disgusts me. This kid was 17 years old. He got shot in the side of the face. I'm not gonna let my anger just be used to slam my hand and to yell and to protest. I'm gonna create something. I'm gonna create artwork. I'm gonna make sure people's energy is gonna be used productively. There's life in anger. There's power. There's creative willpower. We're gonna find our justice.
It is our duty to win. It is our duty to win. We must love each other and support each other. We must love each other and support each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains. We have nothing to lose but our chains.
I'm disappointed as a Fifth Ward resident that you, Jeremiah, would hold a meeting like this on the third memorial of Jamar Clark being shot and killed, when you know full well that he's part of the reason that you are holding a city council seat to this day.
Come on now.
He is a part of the reason. So why wouldn't you and the people in this room
who claim to care about North Minneapolis not stop and pay homage to a man whose blood was still on the ground when we showed up 3 years ago? The streets were empty. Not a single politician in sight. Not a single one of you in this room in sight after that man had been shot and killed. But you know who was in sight? Those of us who are on the other side of this sign. We were the ones in sight. So while you all, we did the heavy lifting for 18 days in the freezing cold while most of you sat on your butts. And I'm looking over there at you, Pastor Dan Collison, because I don't recall you being out there. But you're in a meeting like this instead of demanding police accountability and justice on a regular basis. You are in safe rooms with affluent white men instead of being in the streets with the people. Out of faith. Come on now. It's unacceptable. Stop operating in your privilege and start standing up for justice by the power of the Holy Spirit. This man gave his life. And all of you who are sitting in this room, you had the ability to walk down the streets and spend a moment out with the community who is grieving because this man was shot and killed in 61 seconds. 61 seconds! He was unarmed. He was checking on a friend at the back of an ambulance. And you know what he got in response? Bullets to the head. And we had a 10-year-old child who was a witness whose life is forever changed because he saw his neighbor get shot and killed by the Minneapolis Police Department. And I want to call out the bonehead proposal to try to build a new 4th Precinct police station. It's absolutely ridiculous. Those same people talking about building a new 4th Precinct need to be talking about making North Minneapolis a place where there's jobs and opportunity for all. We have so many black men who worked outside the 4th Precinct who are unemployed, who don't have access to opportunity. But here you are trying to create a new location for the very officers who have murdered and terrorized and criminalized and abused and harassed and intimidated this community, and they're still doing the same damn thing 3 years later.
Nikema there, Raisha was there, and there were a number of other folks who were present on the scene when I arrived there. And it was hard to know what to do because you're seeing the street was sort of, full with elders, young kids, all of whom had either heard or seen what had happened. And so I remember showing up and just saying, like, okay, all I want to do is listen. And you got to remember, at the time that this happened, I'm not a council member. I'm a mural artist, right? I'm a mural painter. That's what I do. Paint murals. I think it's important work, but in the grand scheme of things, I wasn't really anybody except a community member when I showed up that morning. Nobody was really looking to me for guidance or leadership, and I wouldn't have had anything for them even if they had been. But I knew that I wanted to be present for my neighbors, and I knew that I wanted to be there to listen to folks. To gain an understanding of what had happened. And I know that I felt rage and I felt heartbroken.
You should be in a room plotting and planning on how to get killer cops off the streets. We do not respect what you all are doing here. This is window dressing. Stand up with the people who are suffering and who are vulnerable. And Jeremiah, as Ms. Kimberly Handy Jones said, you can do better and you can do more. But when people bring issues to your attention, you're constantly defensive, you're constantly arrogant, you don't return phone calls, you act like you're high and mighty, when we need you to come down to the level of the people and stand with us and use your position and your power and your platform to speak truth to power. Yes. After the latest young man got killed by police, Travis Jordan, we didn't see a statement by you calling for police accountability and demanding justice. But here you are in a safe room with these people pretending that you're going to do work on behalf of this city. So here is the reality. Right now you're being arrogant. You don't need to tell me who my neighbors are. These are my neighbors. These are my neighbors are. Don't tell who got back to me? Mayor Fry. You know who I didn't hear from? You. This is unacceptable. What do we want? Justice! When do we want it? Now! What do we want? Justice! When do we want it? Now! Do we want justice? When do we want it? Now! Power to the people.
Union negotiations between police officers and making sure that we're getting what we need out of those union negotiations so that we can have some leverage when it comes to firing an abusive officer. There's, you know, of course, there's a desire to be a lot tougher, to say, hey, just have the chief and the mayor fire them, right? Here in Minneapolis, the city council has control over every department except the police. So, you know, so there's a little bit of a gap there in terms of what the city council can do and demand. But even if the mayor and the chief fire an officer, which they're empowered to do, through the, you know, sort of through that union contract and through the court system, that officer can then be, we can be forced to rehire that officer.
Of recklessness. In order to charge second-degree murder, the state must be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the accused intended to cause the death of the victim. In order to charge first-degree murder, the state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt not only that the accused intended to cause the victim's death, but also that the action was premeditated.
When an officer claims that he or she feared for their safety, there has to be some objective measure that is used to weigh against that officer's articulation of why they decided to shoot and kill someone in the line of duty. Right now, we take the officer's word for it, and we utilize prosecutors who work very closely with police officers to make these decisions. And we know that in 99.99% of cases, those prosecutors are going to give police officers the benefit of the doubt.
Ringenberg and Clark were resting on the ground in a position which rendered Ringenberg unable to remove Clark's hand from his firearm, now in the small of his back. Ringenberg communicated to Schwartzy that Clark had his firearm and that Schwartzy should shoot Clark. Schwartzy did. His actions were reasonable given both his observations and Ringenberg's plea.
In the case last week, but today we are hearing their side of the story in their own words.
But I just walked towards him, and I told him several more times, take your hands out of your pockets. And he still refused. And all he would do is he would just yell, what's the pistol for?
Police procedure to me, you know, when you have a, you know, whether you call them suspect, you know, whatever they were classifying them as, on the ground. And so, you know, I paid like close attention because it just didn't look normal to me when I, you know, saw how he was kind of bouncing around almost like with his feet out, but then he had his hands, you know, kind of like bouncing around the ground or up on Jamar's body or whatever. And so we're just watching this take place, and before you know it, it seems like a minute. It seemed like a minute later, boom, we heard the gun go off. And so, you know, the whole crowd, there was a lot of people out, you know, in the streets, you know, watching all this going on. You know, I don't know how many people were much closer than we were. We were directly across the street. So at that point, it's like, man, this is, you know, you guys shot. People screaming like, you shot him. You know what I mean?
We started knocking on doors and asking people questions about what they saw and they heard. And the youngest witness that we wound up talking to was a 10-year-old boy who was in close proximity to where Jamar Clark was killed. And after he saw the shooting, he actually ran in the house and he said to his mom, "Mom, they're killing us."
With Jamar, and you never gave us any information from witnesses. All you did was push the information that you got as witnesses from the officers who were the ones who victimized and ultimately murdered Jamar. You, Mr. Freeman, did not give a fair and accurate portrayal of what took place with your investigation. Today, you push propaganda. And let me tell you, if the city burns, it's on your hands.
Treat many in our community the way they treat us, without any accountability. That has taken place. So a part of what I would like to see, and what I have done here as a state legislator, is introduce several different bills around what happens when there's a shooting by a police officer. Who does that investigation? Is that the county attorney? Does it go directly to the BCA? Or do we outsource it? Because if we believe that police can have oversight over police and do it in a fair way that doesn't always support police, I think we're kidding ourselves.
Hopefully dismantle the way that white supremacy has been a part of how I've come to understand the world. And Nakima Levy-Armstrong, a few years ago here at Wilder, talked about the social conditioning of white people, that we grow up believing that white values and practices and ways of being are normal, right, and good. And I think that's how I sort of define white supremacy, that just the centering of whiteness is, this is normal, right, and good. And all of these other folks are an aberration of that. And when we look through the violent legacy of history, then we see the way that enslaved people were conceptualized as 3/5 of a human, and all of the ways that white men and women showed up to the Duluth lynchings, and all of the horrors of things that white people have been complicit in. And I started to wonder, what is the toll of that social conditioning on our souls? Who are those men standing next to the men who were lynched in Duluth? And who are those women hollering at the Black children trying to integrate schools in the South?
Of the fact that we have to continue day in and day out fighting for justice, standing for what's right, and pushing for police accountability. Jamar's spirit has brought so many people together across racial lines, ethnic lines, socioeconomic lines in our community. His spirit will continue to live on, and it will continue to urge us forward until we see significant changes take place. As a matter of fact, we have already seen political shifts happen, people uprooted from office, people of color being brought into office as a result of the passion and the drive and the fierceness in our spirits that has arisen as a result of standing up and fighting for Jamar Clark. We've also been able to bring more attention to the issue of police violence and the lack of police accountability that exists in Minneapolis, across the Twin Cities, as well as the state of Minnesota. One of the things that we ultimately want to see is the 4th Precinct police station taken out of the North Side community. And that precinct, which was right down the street from where Jamar Clark was killed, being turned back into a community center where our young people can come and connect with other community members, where they can learn, where they can play, where they can experience a positive community outlook.
We are not defective. We are not defective.
Black kids need to hear that.
Yeah. No shit. I need to hear that. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yes.
We all need to hear that.
Every day.
Imagine. Let me say this, man. Imagine if President Barack Obama had got on TV and said, "Black people, you are not defective. Something happened to your people and continues to happen. And them running a pipeline through your sacred lands is continuing, that's the continuing to happen."
Yes.
And what you experience with that, the invisibleness by which this country tries to position you into, it is happening. And you are not defective. Could you imagine?
And then to say, I'm so tired of the cycle of violence from men to women that I'm not going to perpetrate and participate in that cycle of violence from white people to people of color. I think the absence of relationship is huge, and I also think that the presence of relationship doesn't in and of itself resolve that, right? So you can have a friend who is a person of color, and you can still be very invested in upholding white supremacy and maintaining that privileged, resting, comfortable position in the world. So for me then, again, my whole work is about saying, why is that? What is it in us that allows us to just rest comfortably while other people are harmed and abused and children are separated from their parents at the border? Where's the outrage? Where's the fire? Where's the recognizing of ourself in this other person? And if you can't feel that, if you're in your head rationalizing, defending, what is happening in your heart? Where is your humanity? Where's your soul? And until we can diagnose that as problematic, I think we just evade doing the work.
People on the north side said happened that night. We have to stand here and be the voice of the people who are often on the fringes, who are marginalized, and whose accounts of what happened are not taken seriously. That is part of the problem in this system, when you go up against those who have all of the power. And frankly, we're tired of it. We want to be treated with dignity and respect. We want the system to respect our humanity. We want you and others to realize that Black lives do matter, and we will not rest until we get justice.
We will win. I believe that we will win. I believe that we will win. I believe that we will win.
This is, you can call it a PSA. I don't have a loud horn, but I care about my community. I care about my brothers and sisters that are being killed. I'm pleading with you when you watch this documentary that you walk away with information, motivation, and a level of consciousness that this is not how humans treat each other. This is not humanity. And we're looking to save our soul, the soul of our nation.